Malachi, chapter number 2, as we continue our study of the prophet Malachi, as he is admonishing the nation of Israel because they were taking very lightly and profaning God's covenant, especially that covenant of marriage and the marriage vows. The marriage vows between a man and a woman we found most sacred, should be taken seriously, as many of you know and understand. That when a man leaves his father and mother and he cleaves to his wife, the Bible says they become one flesh. They become one. And when something like divorce happens, it's like taking a piece of garment and tearing it apart. And that's what a marriage does. It tears apart what God has joined together. That's what divorce does. And in today's society, divorce, many use it as a first option. Going into relationships and saying, well, if it doesn't work out, we can get divorced. That marriage will last approximately 15 minutes, maybe. And when God granted Israel that bill of divorcement, it was to be used as the very last resort. There were even some marriage relationships that can overcome problems in a marriage, such as infidelity or adultery, that can be overcome. In some, not in all. We saw last week the treachery of these men who had loved pagan women and were divorcing their Jewish wives in order to marry these pagan women. We saw the problem wasn't new in the history of the nation of Israel. Throughout their history, they had had these types of problems and difficulties. And in divorcing their Jewish wives and marrying pagan women, these men were committing many sins there against God. Let's pick up with verse number 10 there as we continue our lesson tonight. Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously every man against his brother by profaning the covenant of our fathers? Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem, for Judah hath profaned the holiness of the Lord, which he loved, and hath married the daughters of a strange god. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. And this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, nor receiveth it with good will at your hand. Yet ye say, wherefore? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. Again, we see these Jewish men who were divorcing their wives, marrying the pagan women, were committing many sins against God. First was they were committing treacherously as they broke their vows to God and to their Jewish wives. They threw that relationship away. They didn't take those vows that they had committed to each other and to God with any seriousness. You could say they were going through a midlife crisis. They had been married for a few years to the same wife and gone through the same routine. They were in a rut, and then all of a sudden something really exciting and different comes along. And it stirs up their lusts, and therefore they follow their lusts rather than following God and the covenant they made. It's nothing new. It still happens today. My midlife crisis car is an Aston Martin, and my wife bought me one. It costs about $1.25. It's still in its package. It's made by Hot Wheels. No, I did not. That was my mistake. See, they were profaning God's covenant, and they were treating it as nothing. Not only had the Lord given specific requirements for marriage in his law, which he did in the book of Exodus, in Exodus chapter 34. There in verses 11 through 16, Exodus chapter 34, verses 11 through 16. Here we go. Exodus 34 and verse 11. Observe thou that which I commanded, that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before thee the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee. But ye shall destroy their altars, break down their images, and cut down their groves. For thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they go a-whoring after their gods, and do sacrifice unto their gods. And one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice, and thou take of their daughters unto thy sons. And their daughters go a-whoring after their gods, and make thy sons go a-whoring after their gods. We need to understand that this was about Israel's relationship with God. If they went to go and marry the daughters of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, the Amorites and the Hittites and all those ites, they would take them and pull them to worship their idols. Pull them away from God. Break their spiritual relationship with Him. That's why God told them, you're not to make any covenants with these people. You're not to make any treaties. You're not to make any alliances. You're not to make any marriages. It wasn't necessarily because of race. It was for spiritual reasons. We find that the marriage covenant that God had given, it was even built into creation. It's mentioned in Genesis. It's one of the first institutions God established when He created Adam and Eve. The institution of marriage, and then the institution of the family. In our text, we read in verse number 10, have we not all one Father? This refers to God as the Father of all mankind, the Creator of all mankind and of all things. As the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 17 and verse number 28 spoke to those Greeks there in Athens on Mars Hill. He spoke of the great God that we serve as believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. It says, for in him we live and move and have our being. As certain also of your poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Even those who are lost without Christ are related to God through creation because he created them. He created us all. God made man and women for each other. And he established marriage for the good of mankind, the good of the human family, to bring structure instead of letting them do what they want and what was right in their own eyes, which brings chaos. So what these men were doing was contrary to what God had written in nature and in creation and in his covenant. They were committing treachery. But we also see their hypocrisy. We read there in verses 12 and 13 of our text in Malachi chapter 2. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. And this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that ye regarded not the offering any more, nor receiveth it with goodwill at your hand. After committing these sins of divorcing their Jewish wives to be able to marry unsaved or pagan wives, the men brought offerings to the Lord. They wept over the altar, seeking God's help and blessings upon their new marriages. How hypocritical can you get? Lord, I have committed this sin against you by divorcing my Jewish wife and marrying this, heathen or pagan or ungodly wife that I have now. And Lord, I want you to bless it. I want you to bless my sin. I have never known God to be able to bless sin. He can't. Perhaps they had the idea that they could blatantly sin with the intentions of coming to God for forgiveness. Instead of asking permission of God to divorce my Jewish wife and marry the pagan wife, I'm going to do it anyway, and then I'm going to ask God to forgive me. Now, there may be some times in life where we do things that, we ask forgiveness for rather than permission. But there are some things that we can't do that with. There are some things you've got to ask permission first to be able to do. And these men here of Malachi's day and in the nation of Israel, they did not consult God at all about this, period. If they had, God would have told them, stay married to your Jewish wives. You made a covenant with them. Keep it. If they had been truly repentant, they would have forsaken their pagan wives and taken their true wives back. Which is exactly what happened as they looked to establish the priesthood after the Babylonian captivity, and what the scribe Ezra made the men do in Ezra chapter 9 and in Ezra chapter 10, when you read there of the same sin being committed. These men were guilty of hypocritical worship that had nothing to do with a changed heart. Instead of forgiving them, God was ready, as he mentioned there in verse number 12, to cut them off from his people. In matters of ethics and morals, there are many things in our society that are legal, but they're not biblical. Paul said it this way: all things are lawful unto me, but not all things are expedient. Not all things edify. Brides and grooms need to remember that God is an unseen witness at every single wedding ceremony. Malachi mentions that where we read in verse number 14. And he also witnesses those who live together who aren't married. As we mentioned last night in our Bible study, well, we may not have mentioned that. We may have. I'm not sure. God is an all-knowing God. God is an all-seeing God. There's nothing we can hide from God. Our lives are an open book to him whom we have to do. And there may be those who think, well, I can commit this sin and it will be okay. God won't know. That's faulty logic. God won't see me do it. That's faulty logic. Because the Bible teaches us our God knows everything and sees everything. And there is nothing hid from him. And one day there will come a terrible harvest from the seeds being planted today by those who despise God's law and the principles that God built into his creation, into nature. And we are starting to see that, I believe, today in our society. Our society is falling apart. Why is our society falling apart? Many of our families in America are falling apart. As the family goes, so goes the community. As the community goes, so goes the state. As the state goes, so goes the country. We are reaping what we have sown in the past. And we'll continue to do that until God's people get right with God and get serious with God about the covenants that we have made.